little bridge I'm building for the It's a Wonderful Life diorama, where he's on the bridge and he's thinking about jumping, and then the angel appears and decides to jump in the water. And then there's a little lighthouse over here, and this guy comes running out with a flashlight. What's all the commotion? Who's jumping in the river? So anyways, this is pretty cool, like little sticks and dowels and popsicle sticks from I got these at Walmart actually, but you can get them at lots of places like Michael's, Joann's. Anyways, and you just start hot gluing them together with the little hot glue gun, and you just go crazy, and next thing you know you have this interesting structure. And so I'm just making it look like that bridge in the background, and just kind of copying that. But yeah, it looks pretty good. And then this little piece will go up here and be the railing, and you know I'll paint it and it should look really good. Now, one thing that's really good is if you have some of these tin snips. Those are really good for cutting the wood. You can also use wire cutters if you want. You can make the little braces structures, and you can even like these ones I even cut like in an angle when I was doing them. And you just take your pin and you're just gonna mark how you want to cut it, just like in the yard, and you just make it kind of like you'd make a structure out in the yard. And it's funny, like it gets really strong, you know, especially the more braces and supports you put in, but very quickly it gets to be very strong. Okay, so there's the railings. They're looking pretty good. It's a Wonderful Life diorama project is going pretty good. And here's the little shack that the bridge keeper comes out of. I even put a little coal burning stove in there. And there's this little table. One thing that I found really interesting about this is it's surprisingly easy to make all this stuff. Okay, so here's something really cool. If you need little miniature signs to go on your bridge or whatever you're making, you can actually just print those up and cut them out, which seems pretty obvious, but you know, I was originally just thinking that it wasn't possible for me to make little signs this small, but then it just dawned on me that I could probably just print them out on photo paper and then just glue them in place. And likewise, I made a little calendar for the wall there, and it's funny, I probably should put a different date, like the day of the movie, because I didn't realize that the quality would be so high at such a small scale that you can actually just read the calendar. Probably could have circled Christmas, or who knows, you know. Also, yeah, I was able to put little pictures from the movie on the back wall next to the stove, which is really crazy how small they are. Okay, right there I put a little newspaper too, since it's the 40s, and the war was part of It's a Wonderful Life, of course, so. Okay, so here's one of my little figurines. It's about 1.5 inches tall, so it's really small. Anyways, it's getting ready to be baked, and this is baking clay. And so you bake this in the oven for 15 minutes on 275, and that depends on how big of a sculpture you're making. Like a bigger one would require more time. Okay, so here's this first little character hanging out, and he looks pretty good. And here's the bed I made for Scrooge. Now this little guy right here is done, but problem is all that gray on him. That gray, every time I touch him it comes off all over my hands, and then it's starting to smear up onto his face, and it's a real disaster. It's because I used oil-based paints for his clothing. Okay, here's the little tool booth guy from It's a Wonderful Life, or at least my little sculpture of him. and it's turning out really good. And here's this little Scrooge character going on. He's got a little candle. These are pretty easy to make. The one thing that you want to do is not try to sculpt this whole thing, like just have a mess of clay and then try to like carve it out of the clay. What I do is I actually just form the body, and then I form like the torso, and then I'll stick the legs to it separately, and then I'll put the clothes on the torso, and then I'll bring the arms in, and then I'll make the little hands and cut the fingers, and I'll stick those on. Each layer builds it up, and I'll put the candle in the hand and bend the fingers around it, and then I'll build the head and I'll stick that to the torso, and then I'll put the little hat on, kind of like you're dressing a little person or something. So I just finished up my Scrooge and Jacob Marley, and I put little slippers on Scrooge. He's got a candle in his hand. My Jacob Marley I made a little different, but I like him. He looks good. He's being accusatory with his finger.
Accuse you.
And he's kind of skeletal and ghostly. One thing I used wire to make his head popping up in the air. I was gonna just attach it to his body, but it looked really cool like that, so I just left it. Okay, here's a little thing I'm figuring out about painting little figurines and stuff. If you paint it with oil paints, since it's a solid thing, it's not gonna absorb into a canvas like oil and watercolor paints could absorb into a cloth canvas and dry up. But on something solid like this, the oil paint will never dry. So that's a problem. And then as far as watercolor paints, I found a problem with that too. And the problem is that on something solid, every time it's humid outside, the moisture in the air starts collecting on everything. And if this is exposed to the air, luckily, usually they're behind the plexiglass and not much of that moisture is getting into here. But last night when I was working on it, these were getting really moist. And I went to pick him up because he fell off of his little base because the moisture made the paint on his feet moist, and so he didn't fit onto the glue anymore. And so I picked him up, and then blue was all over my hands, and I realized it's because this watercolor paint had turned back into a liquid because of just that little bit of water. So since you can't use oil paints and you can't use watercolor paints on figurines, the solution really is acrylic paint. Now this stuff is awesome because it dries really fast within a few minutes, and it's dry, and moisture is not going to make this liquid again. It's just going to be dry, and it's perfect for that kind of stuff, solid base things. So now what I need to do is get a set of acrylic base paints, like a full color spectrum, which I think you can get at Walmart. I was looking at it, it was like 12 bucks, so that's not bad if you go to somewhere cheap. And that's really important with doing figurines or anything that's solid based. You need to have the right paint.